Welcome, this is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, and I want to invite you to take a few moments to really understand raw and clean food certifications. These two certifications were built by the community of leaders and activists and people who really enjoy food in the food community to take the understanding of food to another level. Now, the first seal that was really developed was a raw seal, and then also the clean seal was then developed subsequently thereafter. But I was very honored to be a part of this. My background is I hold a PhD from MIT, including about 3 or 4 other engineering degrees. And the department that I graduated from at MIT, Biological Engineering, used to be called the Department of Food and Nutrition Science. And I've been compelled to be a part of the food movement. I grew up in India, where my grandmother was a village healer. She practiced traditional systems of Indian medicine. So I had a deep love of food as being medicine and medicine. So in 1970, when I came to the United States, I was very, very interested in medicine. In fact, I went through a whole series of my journey and particularly led me to the concept of systems. In fact, you can read on the internet, I built the first email system as a 14-year-old kid at a medical school. Separate from that, when I came to MIT, I was very interested in systems-based approaches to health. And that, over many years, around 2003, led me back to MIT to do my PhD out of the Department of Biological Engineering in what's now called systems biology. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is after I graduated, I started a company called CytoSolve, and CytoSolve, C-Y-T-O-S-O-L-V-E, is really involved in a revolutionary approach to eliminate the need for animal testing to develop new pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, and all sorts of functional foods. It's a very powerful technology. In the midst of doing this, people in the community knew I had a deep interest in food, a scientific approach. I was called to help facilitate among a group of food manufacturers who are very concerned, including retailers, of this growing area of raw food. You see, the raw food movement about 4 years ago was about a $300 million industry, but no one knew what raw was. So I was really called to help facilitate the development of the raw seal, which evolved to the sister seal called the clean seal. Now what you'll see here is over the last 3 or 4 years, we really built a very, very vibrant community. These are a handful of some of the people who've signed on to the raw and clean food seals, and these are people who are supplement companies, people who create bars, people who create beverages, a whole range of companies who've been very, very excited of taking the level of understanding of food for themselves and their consumers to another level. And that's what the raw and clean food seals really mean. Now let me give you a little bit of background. About 4 years ago, I was called in to really help the raw food community. You have to understand, about 4 years ago, the raw food community was about a $300 million industry, meaning all the different kinds of packaged foods that were being developed for raw. The problem was no one knew what raw food meant. And this was of deep concern to retailers like Whole Foods, because people were using the term raw, and there were no controls in terms of safety. You had small manufacturers who were making, for example, products in their home, and other manufacturers making in large plants. Safety issues were a big concern, because if one product got removed off the shelves, this would mean that the entire category could be affected. So there were legal reasons, and also the notion of $300 million industry, what is raw? So what I did about 4 years ago, as I was called to really help, and I was honored to help, was I brought in a community of around 30 or 40 stakeholders, and we initially met in California, and I went around the room and I asked people what was their definition of raw. And very much like the blind man looking at the elephant, everyone had a different notion of raw. Some people thought raw food is anything that must be below 108 degrees. Other people thought it was vegan food or plant-based foods. Other people thought it was foods that had high enzyme value. The problem was all of these people are extremely well-meaning, extremely dedicated to the raw food movement, but their ideas were frankly quite nebulous. No one really could pin what they were saying, and this is not good when you're trying to build a standard. So over a period of 6 months, it was almost like herding cats. There's a process in science known as multi-criteria decision analysis, which is where you have nebulous understanding or qualitative understanding, a way to bring people together. And so we literally had people get up on a whiteboard and start writing down their particular criteria. The great thing was over a period of 6 months, we came to a consensus. This is why we call this a consensus-based standard. There were 3 things, as you can see, everyone could agree on were the real foundations of RAW. One of them was safety, and this was obviously a concern to the manufacturers, retailers, and consumers. The food had to be prepared safe, right? It can be enzymatically great, it can be quote-unquote really healthy, but if it's unsafe, it's going to cause all sorts of problems. So safety was a critical part of this pillar, of these 3 pillars. The second issue was the notion of minimally processed. People wanted to not, quote-unquote destroy or quote-unquote kill the food. The food had to be minimally processed. Obviously it had to be safe, but minimally processed. And the third notion here was bioavailability of nutrients, which means the nutrients had to be bioavailable. So these 3 pillars really defined how we move forward. So over the next set of 6 months, again, a lot of great debate, a lot of differences. We congealed on using these 3 pillars to now associate it to RAW. And what you'll see here is we came up with the definition of RAW as R.A.W, real, alive, and whole, as you see in this triangle here. And that was really the foundation of the RAW seal. So what we did was for each one of these elements, real, alive, and whole, we used quantitative and qualitative approaches to really define them. And by the way, just to give you a point, in the United States, standards can come 2 ways: imposed top down from the government or bottoms up built by the people. In fact, the government actually likes it when we go bottoms up, and this is what we call a bottoms up consensus based standard, by you, for you. And so you had to get 80 points across real, alive, and whole out of the 100 points in order to get certified. So let's look at this a little more deeper. So the real had 2 components the community decided was important. One was it had to be safe. So if it was unsafe, you got 0 points. It was safe, you got 25 points. The other thing that was also very important to these stakeholders was the fact that the food was not genetically engineered or not genetically modified. And here you can see that you get 0 points if any of the ingredients are genetically modified, and 25 if none of the ingredients are genetically modified. So if you can see, relative to the real criteria, the R in RAW, you could get either 0 points, you could get 25 points if it was either safe but not non-GMO, or non-GMO and not safe, or you could get a total of 50 points. So the total for the real criteria is 50 points. I hope that's clear to you. Next, the next criteria was the notion of alive, the food being alive, which means enzymatic bioavailability. Now, raw food is said sort of use this term in a very offhanded way, but we brought some science to it and some standards around it. And what this meant was we decided that this particular criteria could go from a range of 0 to 20, and it would be calculated using modern bioinformatics and the consensus-based standard by looking at the literal ingredients that were in the product and then the molecular composition of the 3 to 4 major molecular components of each of the ingredients, and then doing a bioinformatics analysis to actually figure out when those particular molecules in aggregate, what's called denatured. So let me give you an example here to make it real. Now, in this example here, what you see here is we have kale, for example, and kale, as you see, some companies make kale chips, have these different ingredients. Now, for each one of these ingredients, what we see is that each one of these ingredients used on bioinformatics has very particular molecules. And for each one of these ingredients, by weight that the manufacturer gives us, we're able to calculate in aggregate based on the processing, as you see in this next slide here, the actual bioavailability curve over temperature. And you got to understand, some people take their foods, like a salad is totally raw, right? You wash it and you put it in a thing. You could consider that as raw food, but that's not part of the standard as of today. But we're talking about manufactured foods where people may be doing some minimal processing, like dehydrating or sun drying, etc. what you can see with this particular kale chip is that over time, as you're heating it, the x-axis has temperature and the y-axis is bioavailability. Now what's fascinating is even up to 120 degrees, this thing is pretty close to 95% or 100% bioavailable. But after around 120 degrees, what you see here is there's a dip up until around 160 degrees to about 80% bioavailability, and after that it goes down again. This is essentially a transition curve. What's fascinating about this is many of the religious people, I should put the quote-unquote religious people in the raw food community, thought that all food, if it went above 108 degrees, was dead. And what you really see, it's really not true for, and again, this will vary from different combinations of ingredients and processing, but we were able to calculate using the standard a bioavailability curve. And in this case, so for example, if the bioavailability or if let's say this food was processed around 140 degrees, you can see that it still has 80% bioavailability. You can get a total of 20 points for this criteria, the A in alive in raw, and so you would get 16 points. All right, next. Now, finally, the last criteria was a notion of whole, and whole involved two elements: organic, which could have a score of 0 to 20, we gave a range, and nutrient density, which we use the Andy score. So total score that you could calculate for this was a total of 30 points. And I think you have to understand, the whole notion here is we don't want to be quote-unquote religious again. There are some products that you can't get organic certification for. And if they were included, we didn't want to nick those people because we really wanted to directionally support those manufacturers who were doing safe foods, those products that were high bioavailability, those that had as many organic ingredients as you could have, and those had nutrient density. And so here you could get up to 30 points in this. And finally, so what you see is the real, alive, and whole really forms the basis of the raw food certification seal. And if you got 80 points or more, you were certified. Now what I want to share with you is when we developed the standards, again, built by the stakeholders here for the community, we had to enumerate this into a formal document. This was a lot of work putting it into formal terms. We held many public hearings, open teleconferences where hundreds of people participated, and that finally resulted in the standards document. By the way, if you go to our website, you can find the standards document. You know, it has evolved over the years and it continually will evolve. There's a steering committee you can read about down below. There's various very great members in our steering committee who bring together every few times a year. We actually call more public hearings. We're always open. This is your standard built by you for you. But when we presented this standard about 3 years ago at one of the Expo West meetings, which Whole Foods hosted, by the way, several hundred stakeholders came, and what's fascinating was everyone said, wow, you've really done a great service, which means the community of the stakeholders had done a great service to really help the raw food movement, because now we had really captured what raw was, which didn't exist. But what also emerged was some people said, you know, you've actually not only defined what raw is, you've actually defined something even more interesting. You've actually defined what is really quote-unquote good food. Some of these manufacturers were heating their temperatures above, let's say, higher than 212, which was a no-no of a criteria in the raw. So we relaxed that criteria and we created the notion of clean food. And you'll see here, we've kept the same elements. So we have the C in the clean, we've denoted quote-unquote as conscious, which is making sure the food is prepared safe. The L denotes live, which is really the organic piece. The E denotes ethical, quote-unquote ethical, means we don't want to really play around with Mother Nature, which is a non-GMO. The A denotes alive, which is really the bioavailability piece, and the N denotes nutrient density. So it's very similar to the raw, but we've relaxed the temperature level. That means it can go over 212. So that's clean and raw. But what's fascinating for me is, having grown up in traditional cultures, having been trained as a MIT systems biologist, is that what we really defined here in many ways is we've sort of gone back to the future, meaning in traditional cultures, food was safely produced, it was minimally processed, and high nutrient density and bioavailability. And that's what we've tried to capture. More importantly, we support the organic food movement, we support the non-GMO movement, we support many of these movements, but we really captured more of a aggregate systems-based approach in this seal. So that's what this both of these seals really capture. A couple of other points that I want to make is if you look at our website, you can find a lot more information up there. All around you can look. We have press articles. There's a Twitter feed. There's a LinkedIn page. There's a Facebook page. But we're really building a community now. Again, this is a standard built by the people for the people. Let me give you one of the important elements is what does this cost to do? To the left here, or to your right, is actually a calculator. You simply type in a bunch of numbers and you can literally calculate how much this costs. Now, one of the things we try to do is we try to make the cost of this affordable to companies that were $5,000 or $10,000 in revenue to companies that were doing 50 or 100 million in revenue. And so there are several elements to calculate, and you can type it in. First is you type in how many production sites you have. That's one criteria. How many products you have, and how many unique ingredients in that product. So let me give you an example. If you have 3 products, one is made of cashew and honey, another is made of almonds and honey, and the third one's made of sunflower seeds and honey. It's not 6 ingredients, it's actually 4 ingredients, right? The cashew, the almonds, and the sunflowers, and the honey. So based on that, and based on the size of your company, the revenue of the company, for example, this is, I believe, about a relatively small size company. You can see what the numbers are. And then you can see for a larger size company here what the numbers are. So what we've done is we've enabled you to scale. Many people actually ask us, are you guys charging enough? By the way, we do this out of the International Center for Integrative Systems, which is a nonprofit entity, and this is really a project of that, many ways done as a labor of love to really help the industry. What I want to share with you is many companies, many great brands go macro. As you can notice, they have a variety of bars, and they also have the seal on the back, along with many of the other collaborative seals that are out there. Another example here is you see the beverage product, Health Aids Kombucha, a very different kind of, so we have beverage plus products that are packaged foods product also. Also a different kind of product for chocolates, another different kind of product that also has gotten a raw food seal, and as well as a clean food seal. On the website, we've spent a lot of effort in really bringing the community together. There's a Facebook page. Once you sign on, we ensure that the community also promotes your product and lets everyone else know. So there's millions of followers in aggregate across all those companies which have now sort of taken on the raw food clean seal. What this means is not only is it Facebook, we also have Twitter and then also LinkedIn. So across these social media communities, when you join, it's again by the people for the people, which means, and also everyone works together to build this movement around the clean and raw food seals. So I hope this has been valuable. Please explore the website. Again, if you want to learn more, you can literally just calculate what the investment will be for you. You can email us. You can re-listen to this video, but it's really easy to get started with this. Again, this is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai for Clean and Raw Food Certified. I hope this has been valuable. Thank you.